Okay, gentlemen, let me just give you an idea of how I'd like things to proceed. The issue tonight is one which is undoubtedly familiar to all of us. We've all been in situations where there's been severe budget restraint, and where it's possible for two different views to be taken of where IT sits in all this. We've all been in situations where business leaders have said, okay, I can save money by doing my job slightly differently, but to do that, I need support from the IT department in ways that they're not being supported right now. So you've got to spend some money if you want me to save money. We've all been in that situation. We've equally probably all been in situations where the CEO's response to that argument is they're like everybody else. If everybody else is taking a hit, IT is going to take a hit as well. Now, this argument has raged for a long time. It's more acute now, of course, because of the current economic situation, but it's not a new situation. We've all faced it. So that's the situation in which we find ourselves, an acute budget crisis, some people intervening to make it worse. Two possible views: either, of course, we must protect IT because it is in itself a way that other people need to save money, or IT is a service like any other and should face cuts. Who'd like to kick off the discussion?
So we've all experienced IT projects with large cost overruns or which don't deliver the benefits which they're initially expected to do. So why should IT be different from any other area of an organisation at a time when significant reductions in spending need to be made because there's no longer the opportunity to borrow money to spend going forward?
It's a horrible phrase, and I really hate using it, but based on what you said, the whole work smarter thing comes to mind, especially in areas with virtualisation and working in the cloud and stuff like that, because with virtualisation you can reduce the amount of physical hardware or software that you need, and with working in the cloud you can use other companies that have already set that up. And I think that I hate using work smarter, not harder. It's one of those phrases that makes me wince, but it's the only way I could think of it's the only way I could think of it. But I just think that there are ways of being able to ring fence specific uses for IT when the rest of the company is facing large-scale cuts, but it needs to be done properly.
May I ask a question? Would you see the IT budget overall being protected, or would you say there's simply a case for projects to be protected as they're brought forward?
I think it's, my own point of view, it's a case that specific projects rather than the whole IT budget being protected.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's certainly been true. I don't know if it's still true today, but it certainly was true a few years ago that if you talk to some people in organisations, they would say, oh, IT treat money like water. They have no idea of the value of money. And we don't want to start that one again, do we, by saying everybody else's budget is down, ours is 10% up. So we're looking probably at bringing in enabling projects that will help other people, that have a bottom line validity to help other people save money, yes? You?
I'd support that last view, in fact. I'm sitting on this side of the room from an ideological perspective rather than because of specific issues to do with cuts. As you said, an IT department will spend as much money and burn through as much money as you throw at it, and quite often more. However, there are very well documented examples of where you can, through a little bit of upfront spending and with a good strategy, use IT as an enabler, but also more and more these days as a cost-cutting base. So while I wouldn't say keep IT budgets bloated, I would certainly say don't take away everything to the extent where they can't focus on the projects or on the initiatives which can and will deliver cost reductions, efficiencies, and the possibilities to enable other people to work smarter and cheaper elsewhere in businesses and organisations.
Before you get rid of that instrument, what's your own experience of IT's ability to deliver on cost saving for other people in the past, when they've come in and said, here's a project that I think is going to save money in my business unit? Has IT in general been able to meet that?
Yes, my experience is in smaller businesses which move a bit more quickly and where the budgets are probably more out of line with the overall turnover size of the business. I also work in the private sector and therefore don't have experience of the larger public sector organisations and suppliers. However, in my case, I work as an infrastructure and operations manager, and the story which I think is most appropriate to this argument, or as an illustrator in this argument, is where I was running a project to consolidate infrastructure, production infrastructure for a well-known website, and through small amounts of initial capital expenditure and the sort of project expenditure, we could realise incredibly large savings, probably of about 30 or 40% of the operational budget. However, because times were tough and budgets were restrained, that very, very small stepping stone of the initial capital expenditure couldn't be realised, and therefore the business was quite happy to go on spending inefficiently much greater amounts of money in order to avoid that initial buy-in. The idea being that that year's budget had already been approved and it didn't matter how much you burnt through operationally. However, once we managed to remove that blockage and get the initial buy-in from the financial directors of the company, we managed to deliver those savings and wipe half of the operational and hosting budgets for the company. So it does work,
yes.
But obviously not all projects are like this, and many projects, likewise I've worked in many projects which have just turned into big money eaters. So as long as you have a good strategy and you're not cutting ideologically or keeping budgets high ideologically, if you zero in on the right projects, you can certainly achieve benefits and they should be protected. Although I recognise that that's difficult in very large organisations where you're looking at a departmental level and not at a per project level or at an IT department on its own.
Yes. Thank you. Gentleman on this side, what's wrong with that?
I've been working in this industry for 10 years, and when I started, we were all using Exchange 5.5, Office 97, Windows NT and the like. And we've been through so many iterations of various releases. We had Windows 2000, then we all went crazy for NAS, then we're all going crazy for virtualization. But it seems to be the same thing. It's going to solve all of our problems. This next technology that we get in is going to be fantastic. And that technology comes in, we spend a whole load of money on it, we have a whole stack of problems with it. And then we kind of sort of say, well, we'll disregard all that because the next technology that's coming along is going to solve all of our problems. I'm pretty sure if you trace it all the way back to the 1960s when we were rolling out mainframes, we had exactly the same promises and exactly the same thing. Another issue on the subject of the IT budgets is that we have this kind of ongoing thing where the same thing just repeats itself over and over again. If you look back through IT, even back when I was at school, the IT department had the biggest budget. IT is a massive component of business budgets. But if you look historically at things like the space program, where Kennedy had said, we're going to give you 10 years to stick a man on the moon, something that had never been done before. and that was achieved in incredibly short timescales. It's that sort of constraint that brings out that sort of ingenuity. So people are forced to think outside the box, think about different strategies of going about things, think creatively and intelligently about engineering elegant solutions to problems rather than just finding an enormous stack of money and just throwing at it and the hope that that will resolve the problem.
So, in your opinion, our track record, and when I say our, I mean the whole of the IT community, our track record of delivering value for money is not sufficiently robust to say to the boards of companies or organisations any longer, trust us, we can deliver.
I think that would be pretty fair. I mean, I think really what's needed in the industry is not ring-fencing our budgets so we've got this enormous pot of money to pay for. It's an entire change of paradigm. It's about thinking about the problem from a different angle, trying to approach the problem from a different way and finding different and more innovative solutions to those problems. One of the recurring themes that I noticed, for example, is this problem of, well, we'll just bring out a new technology and that will solve the problem. I was sitting down today looking at this release of Office 2003 and Outlook and thinking, what does that really do that Exchange 5.5 doesn't do for me? I'm still sending emails to this person. And in fact, what does that do that Mutt didn't do for me? It's we're doing the same tasks. We've just decided to pay a whole load of money for yet another product. And one of the big things about that seems to be, oh, well, this product didn't work very well, but we can sell you this new product that did. Oh, well, let's reach into our massive budget and pull a load of money out and spend it on that then, which is kind of roughly analogous to Twitter and their braking problems. The brakes don't work in our current car, but buy our new car and they will.
Yes. It reminds me of a story about a lady in Harrods who sees a friend that she hasn't seen for ages, and they both got married in the interim. And one says, well, I married a really old, decrepit guy. He hasn't got long to live, actually, but he's got loads of money, so when he pushes off, I'll be rich. But I know you married a young, handsome, virile guy. And the other one says, yes, I did, but it hasn't worked out too well. And she says, why not? And she says, well, he's a salesman, and so far all he's done is sit on the end of the bed and tell me that when it does happen, it's going to be fantastic. However, are we? I think I take your point that the old-fashioned way of having an ever-increasing budget and endless confidence, despite experience, that the next technology... We've hardly ever had a technology that really made a big difference, have we?
Where have we come in the last 60 years in terms of IT?
Well, as the only person in this room who can actually remember the 60s when we were wheeling out IBM mainframes, I think I would have to say that the internet and mobile phone have changed things in a really fundamental way. And I think when I started in IT, if anybody said to me that there would be a World Wide Web and that there would be a virtually infinite net of telephone communication, I'd have said, you're kidding, I don't think it'll ever happen. But I can't think I suppose the relational model changed a lot as well, but there aren't many technologies that actually have changed things for the better. And there have been an awful lot that have done exactly what you said. They just found another slightly different way of doing the same old.
I think another of these little anecdotes that I like to come out with to sort of illustrate the point is what I call the ever-decreasing Windows Explorer. Just when I started using Windows 95, you had this File Explorer thing, and it got a big pane, and it showed you what all your files were. And in Windows 98, they kind of put this thing down the side. We've got the cute little sort of graphic on the side, which just reduced the amount of space that you got for seeing your files. And then in Windows 2000, they made it even more elegant and gave you even less space for it. When the successor to Windows 7 comes out, there'll just be enough room for one file, and there'll be this fantastic graphic around the outside. Yes,
but that's not what these guys are talking about. these guys are not talking about inflating the whole budget and seeing where we go from here. They're talking about project by project. Is there a business case for this project promoting the growth of business and the reduction of cost? Can you?
So in summary, then probably not. The point that I'm trying to make here, guys, is that I think we're going around about this in the wrong way. We're just going through the same iterations of the same cycle again. Let's pour some money into a project that's going to solve all of our problems, and we have to protect that money because this project's going to solve all our problems, folks. And then we realise that actually it's not, and we just spent a lot more money on it. But that's not a problem because we've got this other idea in the pipeline that really is going to solve all of our problems. And I think, rather than actually ring-fencing budgets for this, I think, to be honest, if we actually cut out, well, we could do a lot better on a lot less money if we changed the paradigm and went about it in a much more effective manner.
Do you work in the private sector or public?
Private, I suppose.
You don't sound too sure.
It's mainly, it is a private business, but I do a lot of work with some public organisations.
Yes. So you can.
I'd say that what you just said was actually the crux of the point. That everything you've said already about inefficient IT projects, changes, promises that are never delivered upon, is in fact quite often true. However, I think with a slightly different paradigm, where IT doesn't expect an endless budget, where it does actually focus on the needs of the business or the organisation which it's serving, then what we're saying on this side comes into effect. The areas where you do actually identify, rather than looking at some pie in the sky, some new technology that's coming up and saying, the products or the efficiencies will follow if we adopt it, which is what has happened a lot in the past and still happens a lot today, actually looking at organisational or financial or process-based issues within your business and saying, right, I have an IT solution to this, not here's a solution, let's find a problem and jack it in. Actually finding a problem and engineering, as you say, an elegant solution to actually deal with that. I'm all in favour of challenging IT departments financially, because that, once again, as you were saying, although I think the moon landing was probably not the best example because they had a big budget, I think challenging the budgets of IT departments puts the pressure on them and motivates them to find these elegant solutions. However, my experience, even in small private sector companies, is that when someone's out for IT, they slash the whole lot. They won't spend money on anything. I gave my example of somebody who wouldn't spend £14,000 up front to save £1.4 million a year. He did eventually after a year because he wanted those £1.4 million. However, IT freezes or hack and slash tends to be absolute. And I think what needs to happen is that IT professionals need to be more aware of where they sit and what they're at, within the organisations they're in and what they're there for. IT is no longer an end in itself. But on the other hand, I think businesses and organisations need to recognise that people in IT know this. I've been working in IT for 10 years now, and we've seen over the last 5 years the advent of the business analyst. This was a role that didn't exist, named as such, more than 5 or 6 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is when I started seeing them pop up absolutely everywhere. And IT departments really became more part of the operations end of a business rather than their own monolithic department within a business existing for its own ends, like the preventer of IT services and so on. IT became more closely aligned to finance, and I think many mid and senior level up and coming IT professionals have grown up in this environment and focus more actually on IT as part of business. And we're seeing this with the adoptions of the current fads of business process automation, business process modelling, which is the next big thing now that we've gone through virtualization and service-oriented architectures and systems. So I think actually maybe I should be sitting on that side if I answer the question honestly. On the other hand, though, my point about keeping it moderate and recognising that there's a lot that can be done with a certain amount of money and to protect at least a possibility of enabling such projects to go ahead.
I think you're still sitting on the right side, because the resolution says some level of spending protection. It doesn't say a general increase in IT budgets, so it's feasible that that should be conducted on a project-by-project basis with a really hard bottom line. But we do have to be very careful, don't we? I take what this gentleman says this far, that I heard a presentation recently by a former colleague of mine who now works at YPG, and he was talking about the cloud. And he believes that any bottom line improvement which is obtainable through the cloud is, at this stage, completely unproven. And that people are going into it on a basis of an act of faith. Well, I think at the time of financial stringency, acts of faith are actually quite dangerous. So there is that need for caution. Let me share with you what I think was a very interesting case that maybe ties together some of the elements. A friend of mine is a CIO for now, has had a really rough ride for the last decade or so, for a variety of reasons, some of which is its own fault and some not. He told me an interesting fact. If you took all the profits that the airline industry has ever made and all the losses that the airline industry has ever made, the losses are bigger than the profits. So if anybody had been there on the day the Wright brothers took off, the human race would be better off. But he had two moments of insight. He's the CIO, so he came from a normal IT background. And the first moment of insight that came to him was that 80% of what the airline was doing for its customers, they should be doing themselves. Yeah, they should be booking the tickets. They should be paying for the tickets. They should be logging themselves on. They should be handling their luggage. A whole range of things the airline did for them should be self-service. And the other thing, and this I thought was, somebody once defined genius as a blinding glimpse of the obvious. He said that in the airline there are no IT projects. There are business projects. And the function of IT is to support those business projects. And he never goes to his board and say, hey, I've got a bright idea. It's always up to the business leaders to go to the board and say, here's what I want to do, and Paul says he can support it. Now, if maybe the revolution we're looking for is for more people to really live that message, that there are no IT projects. There are business projects. And that maybe would be a way of tackling this budget issue. If we always have an open door, but the business leader must come in and say, here's what we might do. Or I suppose the IT leader might go to the business leader and say, think about it, but the business leader must be the actual project initiator. How does that sound?
I think that actually sounds very sensible. That's one of the problems I've noticed with IT is it's treated very much like the company canteen or the cleaning service or facilities who look after the building. It's not part of our core business. It's just one of those add-ons that we need. You've got to feed your employees. You've got to have a car park for them to park in, and someone's got to wander around that, make sure it's secure. IT, you've got to have a computer on the desk and a phone because you've got to have them, haven't you? Really. People don't think of IT as a core part of the business that enables the business to deliver. It's just another department. They're the people who the fucking system's always down. My laptop doesn't work. They delivered that desktop that's late. It's not a core part of the business that people see as being what enables the business to function, basically. So people don't really, the business and the IT department often don't seem to really engage with one another. The business kind of sticks its hand and says, I want a PC on that desk. Why? Well, Bill Gates says he's got to have a PC on every desk. And they come along and they just drop one on that. I worked for an IT outsourcing company many years ago who worked for an airline company. And that airline company came along and said, we want a new laptop, please. Yeah, no problem. Here's your laptop. We need a web server. Yeah, here's your web server. But there's never any conversation between those two businesses over, here's our business requirement, and the IT company coming back and saying, right, well, okay, we listen to what you need to do, and we think this is the solution to your problem. Yeah, it was totally driven by the business saying, we want this particular piece of kit, and the very expensive IT contractor coming along saying, yeah, here it is.
Yeah, I think the relationship between outsourced suppliers and their customers has an awful lot wrong with it. I set up and ran a company called Butter Cox, which was an IT consultancy company, and we were taken over by CSC. And we did a lot of what I think was really high-grade research work for our clients. And CSC that was one of the things they wanted to buy. We produced for them a report on outsourcing performance. And I said to my team, you've got to be very careful because CSC owns us and they are big outsourcers. So we don't want to have rows about what's in the report. Check it out every step of the way. Check it out with CSC to make sure. So we produced a report the hard part was producing something that was hard-hitting, subject to that constraint of not upsetting them. But we managed it, I thought, pretty well. And then, when the report came out, I got an email from one of CSC's top salesmen that said, David, what are you trying to do? Wise up the mugs? And I thought, God, that's really quite shocking. Really quite shocking. So it may be, I wonder, do you think that if we bear in mind this example of Paul at the airline saying there are no IT projects, only business projects, the one way of lifting the IT spend out of the mire is to go with that and actually start inspiring the business users rather than... I'll tell you what's interesting. If you think about it, when I started in IT, we were the astronauts of our time. If you went to a cocktail party and somebody said, what do you do? And you said, I work in computers. Oh, wow. Nowadays, if you say, I work in IT, people go,
Nowadays, if you work in IT, they go, oh, really? Do you know, I've had this problem in my machine.
Yes. So maybe one way of moving back from that despised position is to adopt Paul's maxim of there are no IT projects. I'm here to deliver your business goals. How does that sound?
I'd have just one proviso on it, with that some projects I think have to be started off by IT. If we're talking about rationalising infrastructure and saying not only can we do stuff for you, but we're also looking at the big picture of the IT stuff we've got and making sure we're driving down costs that way as well. But I agree with the point in the whole. And the other thing I was going to say is, of course, when you have business-initiated projects, that's great, but you need to make sure the business people stay engaged with that process. Often they start off with this great idea. You say, yes, IT can help you provide the solution, and then suddenly they lose interest when you're going about providing that solution, and that's when I think often you don't get the benefits realisation because you haven't had that engagement.
Yeah, two very good points. How do you justify infrastructure investment? When you go to your board and say, I need £1 million to update the infrastructure, and they say, what are you talking about? What do you say?
Oh, one way that I've seen it being done is saying, well, if we invest this £1 million, it means we're going to save this much per year. And then after we've made those savings, we're going to reuse those savings and reinvest in another infrastructure project, which will continue saving. And so this way, overall, you're going to not really spend anything but continually improve infrastructure and keep costs down in the long run.
Do you find that works? Because I know a lot of board members who'd say, well, I'd rather have the £1 million now.
I think you need to have someone strong to drive it, and that's convincing. But yeah, it's not easy.
Yes. Sorry, you were going to speak again. What's that, right?
I'm going to be making a point about the operations. I was just thinking, as you were saying about IT projects and saving money, it's not necessarily there for IT projects saving money. It's also for providing scalability and fixing existing problems with your system, and it's seen as we'll upgrade and it'll solve all our problems, only to discover that it's a new system and you then have to spend even more money trying to run to keep still with it, which is why I'm on this side of the fence in terms of saying at the moment there are a lot of projects out there where until issues are clearer about where departments are going to merge into, how synergies are going to occur, it's very difficult to kick off a lot of projects at the moment, and a lot which are running should probably be just suspended for the time being. But your comment about the business analysts earlier, there was an interesting talk here about a year ago where one of the points which was raised was a century ago electricity was seen as an entire department in its own right because they had to rip out all their existing water wheel or windmill powered infrastructure for the mills in Lancashire and so on, and therefore it was a completely new department with your head of electricity. At the moment, IT is seen as a separate department because back in the 1960s onwards, it was a completely different skill set for bringing these things online. Then, as we've seen the industry progress into personal computers and then network computers and now back to data centers again, the industry as a whole continually says we're reinventing everything. We're going to go for cloud computing, which means we need to rewrite our entire code base. We need to deal with the lawyers about the legal aspects of that. We need to retrain our users. We're going to change our client base and completely rebuild the business just to support this latest technology basis. I think we're getting closer to the point now where IT is going to split into a service-based group, which will probably be tied in with operational groups and real estate service groups. So I work for a large organisation where we have a corporate real estate service. They sort out water, electricity, buildings, telephone systems. There's no reason why our printer systems and email can't go into that function along with all that IT infrastructure. And at that stage, you can start saying the IT division can go back to being systems integration specialists and people who have a high skill set across the board in technology, who go in as consultants for other areas for business-driven projects, but like other business areas have to pitch why their idea benefits the business, not we need to upgrade for this reason, but this area needs to improve its software to do, increase in throughputs, increase in reliability, new market areas, but then that gets driven by your business areas rather than the IT division.
How would that suit in your businesses?
It would be difficult, although I can see what you're getting at, and it makes perfect sense. The problem is, of course, that you need an IT body because you're generally dealing with large amounts of expenditure, regardless of whether you've outsourced your infrastructure or not. You need a good in-house knowledge base, and you need, a group of people and a group of services, a group of contracts. You need to have economies of scale there. At the same time, you also can't have one developer and one tester sitting out in each sort of little group of desks out in the business. And I think the thing that's lacking, or that I've seen lacking in implementation, is generally that you don't actually have that's interrupted my train of thought.
They could hear what you were saying.
Yes, well, this is quite brilliant. They don't. You don't have that coordination between the business and between the IT people who sit together in order to effectively have IT people as ambassadors to the business, pitching and also helping with solutions. So they tend to go off and solutionize on their own and then say, here's what I've come up with. Then the business will cast their eye over it, say whether they like it or not, take it back for another iteration. In the company that I'm currently working at, or which I'm going to leave at the end of this week, they embrace the DSDM development methodology, which begins to address some of this, because you've got your business ambassadors, you've got your business representatives, and at least one member of the technical team is very much out there, be they a business analyst or a developer, out there in the business working day in, day out. And that's forming the seeds of this integration between business needs and the ability of the IT team to provide it. Going back to what you said about the business, that there are no IT projects, it's all business projects. We also moved towards that, and the company I've been working at has been focusing on that very heavily. The initial hurdle which they had to overcome was that people out in the business who wanted new functionality in the web portal and platform through which they delivered their business services to their customers viewed IT as the people who looked after the computers and after the infrastructure, and therefore viewed them with a huge amount of distrust and in many cases animosity. And you have to sort of overcome, the idea of the animosity might be a little bit comic, but you have to overcome that idea of this divide between IT as something that's outside of the rest of the business, whilst also coming up with a clever approach or a process to enable the integration with the people who are actually creating or coming up with the functionality or the services that are required by a business. Which then have to be implemented, at least partially, by IT.
I think you can get around that with the business by making a very firm line between the areas of IT which run the IT infrastructure for the business and the areas which build the business. And from my viewpoint, it's a lot easier because we tend to use either pairs or triplets for dealing with the business, in that you'd always have a development lead, a project manager, and a business analyst, or possibly just one, two, or all three of those, depending on the individual skill set, so that when the business has to look at a project, they have a core group or individual who then is just their interface into everything else. But I'm kind of lost as to... I can understand how for small organisations they would see IT as just being a single department, but in the same way as if you're wanting some construction done and you hire an architect, that architect's not seen as being the person who does the actual building work. So when a skip load of rubbish appears outside one day, you don't necessarily blame them for what's happening in the background. So I think we can be a lot better in articulating to the business that there are different areas within an IT division, and then separating it out.
Yes, that's true. And my background is from smaller companies where everything's done and everyone pretty much knows what everyone else is doing. You've got 150 people in a business of maybe 500 people who are responsible for IT. My main point was really to do with coming up with the processes to ensure that integration is continuous. Now, you're talking about having representatives of IT to a business in however many you need per project. You need to also ensure that it goes all the way down the chain, because many companies and big, large and small have an outsourced infrastructure, and you need to make sure that new ideas which are being implemented in the business by IT can filter all the way down to ensure that you're being efficient all the way up and down the chain. And that's something that I haven't really seen working very well to date, but it's what we should be aiming for.
Is there a case, and maybe I'm finding myself moving across the way, that IT hasn't been very good at saying, this is what we do? That we've always waited for people to come to us to say, we need this, we need this, we need this, rather than actually going and saying, look, as your example from from the airline, actually this is what we do. We provide X, Y, Z to enable you to do ABC. Maybe there's a case that IT itself needs to change the way it views itself and then perhaps that will help to avoid some of the things that we've spoken about, IT seen as an endless money pit. But also, I think one of the things you mentioned was sort of champions of IT. I think you also need to try and reduce the here's the latest thing, we must go with it attitude, which some sort of people may have because the news IT industry is creating a big buzz when actually that's the last thing the company wants to go down because it's just not suitable for them. But the guy at the top has gone, oh, we love this, I love this, let's run with it.
Yes, I think there's something in this which is of fundamental importance and which, after thinking about it for as long as I have, I still don't fully understand. IT leaders, whether they're CIOs, IT directors or whatever, have been trying, I think, for at least 30 years to say, I'm not a technician, I'm part of the business. Now, you get a handful of CIOs who manage that. One of my friends was on the board, and I was his mentor for a time. And I used to go with him to board meetings. And I said to René one day, the thing that really impresses me is that if I were a complete stranger here, and they said to me, pick out the IT director, I couldn't do it, because you talk the same business language as the rest. But the fact is that I would say, as a generalization, over the last 30 years, most IT leaders have not made that transition. They are still regarded as technicians. They're not they don't speak the language of the board, they don't communicate with the board. I can remember once being at a meeting of a company, and they just had a major program of divestment, getting rid of non-core businesses. And I said to the IT director, what's the turnover of your business in its new shape? And he said, actually, I don't know. And as he said that, the chairman walked past, and you should have seen the expression on the face of the chairman. He was just thinking, this geek is not interested in our business. So I think you're right. I think there is that transition to make. A handful of CIOs have made it, and if the CIO doesn't make that transition, his or her team are not going to, that's for sure. So I think that's become a burning issue. Now, the difference I sense between the two sides in this argument is that this side of the House seems to me to be saying, even in these adverse circumstances, there is still a case for having projects, not an overall inflated budget, but projects that enable cost reduction, and for supporting those projects as an investment in better performance in the future. And this side of the House I take to be saying, even on that basis, tactically, this is the wrong time to be asking for funds, even for projects like that. Now, I'm going to ask you now to think about where you're sitting and whether any of you want to move over, and then I'm going to take the vote, and then I'm going to close proceedings. How's that? Would anybody like to move? There we are. Well, do I include you as a voter?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
On this side, I think. Are you going to vote, Ben? No, I'm voting.
You three are voting? So it's 6-3 in favour of the courageous option. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sorry so many of our colleagues didn't make it, but what we lacked in numbers, we made up in quality. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming down tonight and giving up your time, and hopefully you enjoyed that. I know that was a little bit different for a YPG event. Certainly, we're not normally as delegate-led. Hopefully that hasn't put you off coming back again, and certainly if you'd be interested in volunteering, we do need volunteers to come up with ideas for events like this, to then actually translate those ideas into reality. There's also a whole raft of behind-the-scenes type of things, promotion, social media. You probably noticed I was on the laptop, so I've got some quotes for tonight, and we'll put together a report to sort of highlight some of the key ideas and things that we discussed. And that'll be on our website shortly. So there's plenty of things to do if you do want to come and volunteer.